world-renowned conference at places like PyCon when they're talking about regional conferences and what they want it to be like. PyOhio always is named first, and he's put in so much work. I want to thank you, Eric. It's been amazing. All right. So at PyCon 2012, I believe, there was a talk by Jessica McKellar about the Boston Python workshop for women and their friends and how much it had done for the Boston Python user group. It's a great video if you want to watch that. And we've started doing imitations of those locally. So far, there has been a Columbus, an Indianapolis, and a Dayton version. This is a one-weekend workshop, Friday evening and all day Saturday. It's seriously beginner's intro. You don't need to worry that you're going to invite someone who's not going to be comfortable. I've personally had everybody there from 11-year-old girls to housewives to grad students in computer science who just hadn't gotten around to Java yet. Who had been doing Java, hadn't gotten around to Python yet. And they worked together great. I was just blown away by how well it worked. So this is a great thing to invite people to. Now you may be wondering, what's women and their friends? Am I a friend to women? Well, you are a friend if you bring one to the workshop. The rule is men can attend as the guest of a woman. It's our little gimmick to make sure that it is largely aimed at women and that men who are interested become our recruiters. And of course, it's a nice way that, dads can bring their daughters and there's couples who come together. Yes. So we've done one so far in each of these three cities. Tentatively planning the second Columbus one for September the 20th through 21st. Our spring sponsor was Leading Edge, and we're hoping they'll sponsor again or that we'll find another one. So this is something, if you're in the Columbus area or you know people, have relatives, start inviting them to this. Indianapolis, we're planning for the very next weekend, the number 2 out there. And 6 Feet Up has already jumped in to sponsor that. Yay, 6 Feet Up. So if you're in one of those cities, start thinking of people who you want to steer to us. We have some needs. We need apprentice instructors, because I don't live in Columbus or Indianapolis, and I would love to get locals taught in how to, I would love their help, and then get locals taught so that they can then carry on from there. We also like to have some lunchtime infotainment where people come in and show cool stuff that's being done with Python to give them an idea that, we're kind of doing Hello World right now. I try to make it fun, but at lunchtime, we can blow their minds with the sort of stuff that's in store for them, and it's kind of like a lightning talk sort of thing. Now, if we're talking about another city, then we have a few more needs. We need a sponsor, but it's not big money. Basically, we just try to buy them lunch, and that doesn't have to be much. A venue, and then we need the local user group to get involved in publicizing it, and we really want to tie it in well with the local user group because ideally, a whole lot of those students would end up as active members of the local user group. So if you're interested in doing one of these in your city, talk to me. Would love to help make that happen. And, okay, openhatch.org/wiki/name of the city Python workshop. You can see what's still up there from the number 1 workshop in each of those cities. And over the next few weeks, we'll update that with information about the coming workshops. So thank you very much, and hope to see some of you and some of the women you know at the workshop.
So Christian's getting set up. Palm, protobufs are lightweight messages. Is that right? And Katie, you're on deck. And then Larry Hastings. Is Larry here? Right over there? Okay, you're in the hole with Go With the Grain of the Pickle.
So this might actually be really quick if my slides don't show up. Hooray, they did. Okay. Hi, I'm Christian Wyglandowski, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about a library that I have contributed to that we use at work called PALM. Stands for Protobufs are Lightweight Messages. So protobufs, abbreviation for protocol buffers, which is this very weird name. At least I think it's a weird name. It is a binary message format that came out of Google. So you can think like JSON, but binary and with a schema. So it's very useful for cross-language message exchange, just like JSON is. There are there are bindings, libraries that support protocol buffers for pretty much any language that you can imagine. And that's sort of an introduction in case you weren't familiar with protocol buffers. So they have their own sort of specification language. So here's a definition for a conference protocol buffer. It has a few required fields. It has an optional field and a repeated field, which is kind of like an array or a list, I guess, since we're Python developers. I should say list. And then you see there's various types. So it does have, it has a schema. So we have a start and an end, which are doubles. Those would be like dates. And a name. The name is required. An optional string location. So there's a definition. Here's a definition of a talk, because we had in the previous slide, the very bottom, the repeated talk. So we define another type of object there, or another type of message. So there's a problem, or we ran into a problem at least, at Bump with Google's protocol buffer library. It was very slow. I mean, surprising for what you would think would come out of Google. I think it's because they weren't using protocol buffers in any sort of really area where they really counted on the performance. So another thing is it was not very Pythonic. I don't have an example of the API here, but if you look it up, you would see it's kind of weird. So we wrote Palm. It's written in C and Python and Python all wrapped up together nicely. It has a little command line utility called palmc that you use you pass it a source directory and a destination directory, and it will take your .proto files and it will compile them into name_.palm files. And so here's the code that it generates. And just for those two messages, it winds up generating quite a bit of code. I can keep paging through here. Lots of code. This is just the conference. Did I pass up the talk yet? Oh, there we go. There's the beginning of the talk. So lots of code generated. Maybe that scares you. I don't know. So you import those, and then you get to use them in Python. And so here's a little example of using it in Python. So we import the conference. We create a new conference. We can pass name, or the various fields as parameters. Then you can also access them as attributes. So we set start and end. Then you can add, so we have the talk repeated, so you can say I want to add a talk, and then that gives you a new talk object, also appended onto that repeated field, and set title and speaker. And you don't have to, so there was another field, I think, or I had the date fields were optional, or the start and end on a talk, because you never know, before the schedule's set, so I just left those off. And then you can call a .dumps on the object, and that will give you, the binary representation of it that you can pass on over the network to another service in another language, and it can open it and read the data. And then at the very bottom there, that's how you would load up. So let's say you got the bytes from somewhere else. That's how you would create your own.
So Larry's up with Get with the Grain of the Pickle. Michael, you're on deck.
Great. All right, so this is about the Pickle serialization library. I hope you've all heard of it, because I'm not going to describe it all that much. But just as a quick overview, there are 3 binary serialization libraries built into Python, a way of taking a Python object and turning it into a stream of bytes so that you can write it to disk, pull it off of disk later, and reconstitute it, and get the original object back. So of the 3, Pickle, Marshall, and Shelve, Marshall, all of these Python libraries are yours except for Marshall. Attempt no landings there. Marshall is for Python's internal use only. It's not recommended for user code. It changes between every version. What it's actually used for internally is for PYC files, but don't use it yourself. And Shelve is really Pickle plus the DBM module. It's a way of storing databases. So it really doesn't buy you anything above Pickle. If you're storing Python objects, you really should just use Pickle directly, which will solve your problem. It will get your stuff stored on disk and reconstituted later, but you kind of have to code around it a little bit. It changes the way that you approach your program a little bit. And that's really what I'm going to talk about, is how you have to change your program and the surprises. I took a program I was writing. It's an implementation of a popular card game called Mealborn, and I wanted to write it in Python 3, and I wanted to automatically save and restore the state. So when you're done playing, you just hit Control-C, and it automatically saves out. And I wanted to use Pickle. And I had a lot of surprises along the way. So the first big one Dunder init is not called on your objects. If you have an object that you have pickled and you unpickle it and you get the object back, your init is not called. So, among other things, this means that if you want to add a new member to an object, if you're changing the structure of the class, you can't just add them in the init because the init's not going to get called. Instead, you need to add them at class scope. And this is only obviously going to work for immutable objects. So if you have a mutable object and you want to have a new member that contains that immutable object, then you're going to have to do something funny where you detect a special field and yada, yada, yada. You'll probably have to call a function after you unpickle in order to do that sort of fix-up stuff. Hopefully you can avoid it. The second surprise is that dunder new is called for unpickled objects. So you can do a little bit of work in there if you like. I was shocked by that. The third big surprise was that any object that you're pickling, its class has to be stored in a module and has to be at the root level of that module, and it has to have the same name as what you would get from .under name from that class object. Because what Pickle does internally is it actually writes down the name of the object, and then when it reconstitutes it, it pulls out that name, goes to the module, pulls out that attribute with that name, and then calls dunder new and feeds in all of the stuff. That's how it recreates your objects for you. And so if you did something funny like creating types with the 3-argument version of type, you can do that, but you still have to make sure that the name of the attribute in the module is the same as the name that you have given the class. The fourth surprise, everybody knows that Pickle has this really clever stuff inside, or at least I hope everybody knows. Pickle has this really clever stuff inside where if you have an object that has multiple references to it, those multiple references will be preserved. So if you have a pointer, if you have a reference to a dict 4 different places in your object, when it reconstitutes it, it'll still be one dict and there'll be 4 references to it. But that only works inside of a single call to pickle dump. If you have multiple calls to pickle dump, like this, then if A and B and C all had a reference to the same dictionary or same object, it would create 3 different objects when you reconstituted it by calling pickle load 3 times. So what you really have to do is this. You make one call to pickle dump, and what I recommend you do is you have a dictionary. You take all of your top-level objects that contain all of the state of your program. You have to make sure that they're all top-level objects and they contain all the state that you care about. You throw them all into one dictionary, you pickle that entire thing all at once, and when you're done, when you want to pull it back later, you reconstitute it all at once, and that will solve your problem. And that's what I recommend you do. Thank you very much. And in case you're interested, the meal born is right there.
So my lightning talks, I'm actually kind of out half of it because I don't think I could do it all in 5 minutes. But what I'm covering is something called DAMAIL. And it's a funny acronym that was coined, and we'll get to that eventually. We have no idea to pronounce it. I've heard people say DAMAIL. I've heard people say DAMAIL or whatever. I have no idea. It doesn't really matter because it's more of an inside joke that we kind of grew out of control. Which is how some things work in the computer world. So a little bit of backstory. I might be a little obsessed with IRC, and there's a IRC bot I run called Jenny, and it's based off work from Fenny by Sean Palmer. And there's their person, Noah Slater, who built a web service called oblique.py, which runs in a Google App Engine. You send an arbitrary Python code, and it sends back the output to you, and it's all sandboxed, and it's kind of crappy because it's Python 2.5.2, so it's like kind of outdated. You can't do fancy stuff with it. And this kind of all coexists. So you can, run Python code with the bot and it'll send it back to you. And you don't have to worry about the computer running the bot on, being taken advantage of. So it's really nice. And it's sandboxed. So like it's supposed to be difficult, to break it, which leads to how this all started. Someone found a clever way to break the service. And what happened was it'd lock up whatever it's working on. And fortunately, since the way I think the App Engine works, every so often it restarts the script. Or I'm not even sure how the App Engine really works. But anyways, it breaks it temporarily, not permanently. So being a responsible programmer, I decided to contact the maintainer, Noah Slater. And the following story occurred about a month ago on June 20th. And these are small snippets of IRC logs. I was like, in other news, it breaks. Someone else chimed in saying it's still broken. And at this point, you got to realize, like, this guy built this thing like 3 or 4 years ago. He never touches it. It just kind of put up there. And other people kind of forked and started using other projects. So at this point, he just doesn't really care about it because he's not using it anymore and he hasn't touched it. in years. And I'm, always bugging him saying you should add new features. And I'm like, when are we ever going to get Python 2.7? I'd really like to see some, 2.7 stuff, because I doubt this is ever going to go in Python 3, especially considering how difficult it is to get stuff in his app engine. So after much annoyance from him, he decided he's about 45%, ready to delete the whole repo and just forget about it. He's, getting annoyed about it. So he decided to create a new license, and it's where the mail came from, which basically stands for, this is the first draft of it. Copying and distribution of this file with or without modification permitted in any medium without royalty provided. You do not contact me about the file or any problems you are having with the file. This file is offered as is without any warranty, support, or even implicit willingness to talk about it. So he's basically, you can do whatever you want with the code, just don't come bugging back to me about it for anything. Few names we were playing around with that we were like, well, what are we going to call this thing? And he's like, we're going to call it the Curmudgeon Public License. Grumpy GPL license, I was kind of for, because that'd be a kind of play on words with the GPL and might ruffle Stallman's feathers a little bit. And then a buddy of mine, Boof, offered the Don't Ask Me About It license, and that name kind of stuck. And it stuck quite a bit, because now it's technically official. It's on GitHub, which makes it GitHub official. And there's an unpublished Wikipedia page about it. Soon to be published. Few people are a little bit nervous about submitting it because we're waiting to hear back from Free Software Foundation and the OSI, which I'm not entirely sure we're ever going to hear back from them about this, but it'd be fun to hear their input on and how it's compatible with the GPL and other licenses. So kind of an inside joke that kind of got taken too far, which in the world of licenses, which kind of goes with standards, the obligatory XKCD with, how standards proliferate, and you can say the same thing about licenses too.
Well, they're obeying the license, right? They're not replying to you, so
Yeah. Well, yeah, which leads to the interesting thing about the license itself, because let's see if I can pull up the Wikipedia, or this is the GitHub one. What's the license itself licensed under? Itself. So if you have questions about the license, you can't go asking him about it. So have fun with this. I'd really love to see someone license a project under something bigger than the license itself. So yeah, inside joke, got taken a little further than it need to. Always for a good laugh, and it came from Python. So.
Talk about lazy pandas. I've been playing with Reveal.js during this conference. It's the first time I've really seen it. So now it's up on slides, so you can actually go get these slides instead of my crazy markdown. And so I went to China, and pandas there are really lazy. No, it's not what I'm talking about. Although this was a photo from 2006, so it was a lot of fun. I had fun traveling there. So here's the problem I ran into. Here's my motivation, right? Pandas is awesome. I love R. And Jeff Spees, who's here at this conference, told me at one of our Python Charlottesville meetings that Python will overtake R, and I couldn't believe it. I had to see IPython Notebook and Pandas to believe it. So here's my motivation: is that I'm pre-processing some data set into one or more tables. I'm going to load that data into Pandas without aggressively consuming memory. And in particular, I have data that's too large to fit in memory. I could be processing all of my production access logs from 3 years, and it is maybe something like 20 gigs on disk. Too much for memory, and I'm trying to build this in a web request too, by the way. So I'm just going to use a query to pre-filter the data, and I'm going to watch for memory consumption on everything in between my data and Pandas. That's what's happening. But here's the obstacle. So this issue here is data frame's known that its constructor is not lazy, right? So you're going to have to give it a list. And fundamentally, if I'm building a list of these things, it's going to consume way too much memory. And so, I just skipped to the end. All right. So what I tried a few methods, sort of with Pandas 0.12, and sort of naive approaches. I was able to very, very easily consume 2 gigabytes of memory with a CSV file that was only 40 megabytes on disk. So SQL Alchemy is still awesome, by the way. It exposes a lot of things that you need, but what I was doing was just taking query objects and passing them in and hoping it would work. And I just couldn't easily get the APIs to line up. Too much impedance mismatch. So I just wanted to experiment. Here's the experiment. What you see is I'm just simple timing data. The memory here didn't even show up in my activity monitor. Maybe my Python process topped out 150 megs with data on disk that's about 50 megs. This is all of the names data from the Pandas book example, but it's from all of the years, as opposed to what the book does. It just kind of samples the years. So I stitch them together. If I load the CSV file directly, okay, it takes 2.5 seconds on my machine. This is a 4.5-year-old cheap laptop. But if I load it from SQLite, okay, it takes a lot longer, but I'm able to do all sorts of pre-querying, and I can do things like I can query only for Mary, and I can read date ranges and all those kind of things. And so let's look at the code so you can see what I'm talking about here. So I just pushed this up, like literally before standing up at the podium. It's an experiment. I just want to kind of show what I'm working on. Go to the example that I just showed you with the demo files. So I stitched together all the names in the data set. I was hacking on this during the talk today. I was paying attention, though, and I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. So I created a database, and then here's the read all. Just kind of to the point. I'm using SQL Alchemy's very awesome expression language. And if we're doing Mary, you can do this kind of, hey, look at this, where name equals Mary. And I can even come down here and look at this. This is an API I cooked up. So expression file, give it the engine. Here are the columns I want to select, and here is the criteria. And we can even modify it, sort by the ranking of births. And that goes back to then the case here, where these are the data frames sort of in summary that you see. So this is the 20th century sorted Mary, and now you can do all sorts of things with it. These slides are up. I'll be happy to share them. And just to show you a little bit of code, kind of what makes this magic is that this is a file like, altogether this file is, I think it, with white space and comments, comes in 69, 70 lines. But this is the magic right here. Basically, we're just being lazy. And again, looking at the SQL Alchemy code, it does something very much like this in its loading code. But I wanted to have a CSV file-like object. It's a little bit weird that we're deserializing and then reserializing so that pandas can deserialize it. But it's a general purpose CSV generating file-like object given SQL Alchemy expression language.
Heard it? Okay. Speaker Bar is an online community of speakers, event planners, and attendees, and we try to bring them all together in a place where they can learn and share and grow as a community. So I actually wanted to talk about why I started this. Last year, I went to a couple conferences, and 3 months later, I tried to look up the information for that conference. I remember there's a Twitter handle. I remember there's a blog post. I went out to this guy's blog to try to find his talk, and I couldn't find it. So I Googled, right? Found him on Google, messaged him on Twitter. Hey, where's his talk? Oh, it's on SlideShare. Okay, so I went to SlideShare, pulled it down. Oh, there's code mentioned on here, but where's the code? So I had to message the guy again. Hey, where's your code at? Oh, it's on my on my GitHub profile over here. And it was just, it was really painful finding all the information in one place. So I wanted to create something that made it really easy for me to find stuff, right? And a place that I can use to use as a profile. I'm not just a sponsor, by the way. I'm not just a guy that came in from New York. I've been coming to PyOhio for the last 3 years. I'm a big fan of Python. I've been active in the community here for a long time. And so naturally, I thought, which conference could I hit first? And that was PyOhio. So today is our pilot. We have 20 speakers. So 20 of the people that spoke eventually made a profile on PyOhio and at PyOhio, and about 30 attendees signed up for an account. My plan from here is to work on other conferences in the area. I'm in talks with a few people to try to bring it to more of the regional conferences to add value to you guys. The way you can help me out, and I really, really need your help, is I am not exactly sure what to build next, right? I need features. I need to know what you guys want because I'm building this for you. And so thank you. I have T-shirts to give away. I said if you filled out a questionnaire, you would enter a drawing. And so I have some names of people I want to give T-shirts if they'll accept them. Yano. Where's Yano? Michael Yanovich. What size do you want?